Right, hello, good morning. So, a lot of reflections over the last week, kind of being emotionally exhausted with React and looking at Vue. And we had a lot of, personally, I thought was like super fun streams, like looking into Vue, what's lacking in Vue. Like, it has this mental model where you just have a normal reactive scope for state management, and then you have a reconciling scope for user interfaces, which is what we're trying to do with Impact. Only with Impact, it was a little bit like, to put it like this. So there are like three parts to building an app in. Oh, wait, what happened here? Three parts to building an app in React. You have your, oh, look at this. You have your global scope or global, and then you have your context scope, and then you have your component scope or local scope. Let's make this red, and let's make this green. Now the question is, like, how do you write code in these different scopes? So with React, you have the reconciling, and by default, you have something like this. Right? If you even have a global scope, you do that in a reactive way. When I say reactive scope, it means that you define it as like just normal code. It's not a reconciler where the function, like the definition of state management, isn't called again and again and again, having special primitives to deal with that fact. That's what I mean about reactive. And what Impact does is, or did, was move you into this world where you could now move your reactive execution context into React contexts. But you would still have reconciling local, right? So you're still stuck in between this world of, okay, you do some state management locally with reconciliation, and then you can choose to like expose these contexts with reactive primitives and a reactive execution context, and then you can state that like the outer edge of a context is really global with Impact. So you kind of, global is kind of a disappearing thing, because it's just the outer context that's considered global. But you're still sitting there with two different ways of doing state management. You have local state management, which reconciles, and then you have context, which is reactive. And it would be so nice to just have state management that's reactive. And what? But why? This is the thing. Like, this is why I have such a hard time explaining is why do we want a reactive? Why do we want reactive state management? And we often talk about performance as if all the components become like observers that observes the state. Like, for example, here, if you have a reactive context, you can have 50 components. Like, you can have a massive reactive context. You can have 50 components all looking at different state, but they're 100% optimized because they will only reconcile based on the state they actually access from that context. But that isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is, how do you write your code inside this context as opposed to inside this local component? And it's not about context, it's not about local, it's about reactive versus reconciliation. And let's see, I had this, yeah. So let's try to look at something here. So let's see if this makes sense. Can I zoom in a little bit more? I guess this is fine. So let's imagine we have like two execution scopes here. We have the normal component reconciler, and then we have function reactive app. And we're just going to talk about the state management. So how we define the state management. So if we were to introduce, I'm just going to check if we actually have strict mode here, because that's an important part of it. Yeah. So if we were to introduce some state, right? That's perfectly fine. Set count in let's just count button on click. Set count. I'm just gonna do this version current +1 increase. That's kind of, we're already at the problem. Like, the reason I did this was to ensure that I actually increase the latest value. Like, I could do count +1, but I have to think about, is this count actually in part, like, is this on click triggered at the last reconciled user interface? Meaning, like, does it close over the last count? Like that's, yeah, so we're kind of already there. But let's see, is this actually working? Oh, I couldn't even get that to work. Wait a minute, this is something else. I think we should move over to a dev box. This is weird. Why isn't this working? Interesting. Yeah, I have to check with the team. Let's do a dev box instead. Oh, create. Oh, wait a minute. Didn't we? Oh, yeah. Sorry, I clicked the wrong one. Let's see. Yeah, so we're just gonna explore like how we actually define these things. So let's take that one. Let's open the preview. The reason I'm going through this, I want to build up some stuff for the documentation, because, oh, look at that. A beautiful count way down in the corner. Doesn't matter. And this is fine, right? But the point is that every time I click increase, this whole function runs again. And it's weird, right? Because I'm saying use state is 0 here, but this only happens the first time. Like, it initializes only the first time. So we're kind of already just right there. There's two things happening. Like, the first time use state acts differently than the next time it runs. And then you get this friction of like changing that state. Like, can I use the like, is the current state I have access to, is that stale? Like, you always have that in mind. So already there's a couple of frictions, but let's imagine now we have a reactive thing. I'm just gonna call it reactive, and it's just gonna take state. So let's oh, sorry. Return state. So we're gonna imagine it's reactive. So in this reactive state management, we have state reactive count is 0. And then we would, I'm gonna return here, like how it actually works. Yeah, so we could do this, I guess. Well, I'm actually not gonna return it. We're gonna imagine that there's a UI here that has access to this this state. But the point is that this thing, this executes when the component is initialized, right? It runs once. So there's no like question of how should I do this? Let's call onClick, sorry. So if I do state count plus plus, let's just call it increase for God's sake. Just bear with me here because I'm building up documentation as well. Increase. Let's do it like this. This is better. So in this case, there's a question of, is the current count in scope of the last reconciliation? You don't know that 100% for sure. Like you have to read all the code and kind of figure out like, where is this clicked? Is there a use callback for it? If there's a use callback, does it have the count? You know, it's insane. And then, but here there's absolutely no question because there is no such thing as stale state. It's always one single executed scope. You always have access to the latest. There's only the latest state, right? But then we can try to do something like, okay, I just want to start. I want to start an interval when this component is created, right? But the thing is, in React, you can't do that here. We can't do interval equals set interval, right? We can't do that because then we start a new interval every time. So what do? Do you go in, do you use state and then you set the interval? We can try that, see what happens. Let's see. Let's just call it tick. Every second. And this would be the interval. Let's see. And now suddenly, no, that doesn't work. Now it logs twice, right? Why the fuck does it log twice? Well, it's because of strict mode. So you can't do that. So what do we do then? Do we use memo? Like this? Oh, then we get an error. Oh, sorry, use memo is not defined. That's my bad. We're still getting 2, right? So, okay, so what if I don't do this? I actually have to go in here. I have to, come on. I have to use ref, which means that I'm creating this ref that might be a number or it might be null. Because I'm gonna add a use effect here, which is actually gonna run the interval. And then I have to pass the interval here because I'm gonna use it, but it actually never changes because it's a ref, which is weird, right? But because of linting, I have to pass it. And then I have to set the interval here. Tick. Right? So let's try this. But it's still 2. Right? And again, it's because of strict mode. But I just wanted to start this interval and run it as long as the component is initialized. But now I have to go in and I have to like clear interval. I'm not saying that this is something you wouldn't want to do. I'm just saying, yeah, and now I get a type error on this because this might be null. Maybe I could just do this. Can do this. Yeah, can do that. Oh, never reassigned, of course. So now we're clearing the interval. And let's see what happens now. Now we're getting the tick. Wait. Oh yeah, sorry. Every second. Amazing. Okay, what if I wanted to do the same in a reactive scope? I would just do interval equals set interval console log tick every second. And then how would I get rid of this, right? And in the context of a component, that's why we have lifecycle hooks. So on will and mount, I will clear the interval. So let's imagine I have on will and mount. Let's create it. It just takes a callback of nothing. That's all I do. So there's no ref, there's no use effect. It's just, okay, interval, when the component unmounts, clear that interval. Now, the thing is, now you're not protected by strict mode, right? So if you forgot to do this, you wouldn't kind of get the help from strict mode. But fuck strict mode. Like, it's such a babysitter. It's like, we're programmers. Like, the time I've spent trying to get my head around strict mode to do simple things, I spent so much more time on that than the occasional missing clear interval, right? Because this is just proper programming. Like, this is like a senior programmer thinks about like side effects and disposal and everything. Like, that's kind of not the first thing you kind of get into your muscle memory, but that's something like good developers think about. Feel like I'm becoming Jonathan Blow here, but so strict mode is very much like a babysitting tool, but React is for more senior developers because of like its complexity, especially with hooks. Like, this is not something you jump into your first day. It's very different from any other kind of programming because it's based on this concept of algebraic effects. It's not normal programming. Yeah, sorry. This could also be const. So that's one thing. And then it's like, what if I have this class here? I have a class. Let's just shove it in here. Class, some class. Oh, sorry. Which does something. And I just want to create it. And when the component unmounts, I want to dispose of it. So how do I instantiate this class? Well, here I would probably do something like this. Use state, and I have to use the callback to create some class. And then when would I dispose of it? And by the way, I'm gonna do is disposed equals false. This is disposed equals true. And then do something. If this is disposed, throw new error. What the fuck? Or console log. Yeah, did it. Okay, so we instantiate this class, and when we click another button, do something. Do something. So as a good developer, I'm gonna use effect. I'm gonna return a disposer here, and that disposer is gonna dispose of this class. Okay, right? So I fire it up, try to do something, and it errors. Why does it error? I created it here. I'm disposing of it on use effect. There's no side effect. There isn't any side effect, but still I get this error. I've been a good developer. I'm creating something and I'm disposing of it, and it doesn't work. The reason for this, though, is concurrent mode. Because what can happen here in certain contexts is that it actually creates some class, but it will never run the disposer of the use effect. And this is because of what we know as, well, not everyone, like I had to research to figure it out, but you have the render phase and you have the commit phase. So the render phase is when the function is called the first time. That is the render phase. The commit phase is when the returned result is actually applied to the DOM, and it starts running these other hooks like use effect and use layout effect and those kinds of things. But there are certain scenarios in concurrent mode where it does the render mode, which means that it does create the class, but it will never commit it to the DOM. So the only scenario I know about is suspense. So if I were to use like a use hook in here and throw a promise up the suspense, normally it wouldn't be a problem. If the suspense resolves, it just continues rendering, and the use effect fires up and it properly disposes, right? Everything's good. But if you throw to the suspense boundary and then the user changes the state of the app, right? So this whole component tree beneath the suspense is still in the render phase. There's no use effects run here yet because it's pending. And then the user like clicks a button or something, and now the suspense is unmounted, which means that this whole rendered component tree will be just disposed, right? Which is like, it makes sense, but now I can't do something simple as this. I can't write the code. And while in a reactive function, I can do some class equals new sum class. And again, with a lifecycle hook, I can just dispose of it and all is good in the world. So this is why we want a reactive this is why we want reactive state management. It's not because the components perform better. It's because the code you write is normal code. It's a normal language runtime. You don't have to think about all of the stuff I just talked about. This is the overhead. I should probably... this was just like a unprepared rant, but I think it has the most effect with the emotional component to this. But the problem is that React fundamentally doesn't does not have any way to detect that a rendered component tree is being disposed. There just isn't anything. So even if you were to apply a reactive scope to a component, you wouldn't be able to safely do these kinds of things because of concurrent mode. The only way I see that being possible is if you just say that, okay, if you have a reactive component, like it has this reactive state management scope that's exposed to like a reconciling user interface scope, it can't be used with suspense, which is fine. Like, how often do you use suspense? And if you use suspense, you can still, like, a child of this reactive component can be suspense, and then it's caught there. But it's kind of like suspense is only supported by stateless components, kind of, or like they're trying to squeeze in state management and make it work with suspense, but at the cost of all of this shenanigans. And I think that's fine. that's a fine trade-off. Like, if you want to use suspense, use normal function components. If you want to introduce state management to a component, you can't do suspense. It's really sad though. Like, why doesn't the React team have a hook that allows you to act on disposed components, uninitialized or uncommitted components? And maybe they do. Like, I don't know. Maybe there's a way, like, you can kind of detect it, right? The thing is that yeah, maybe that could be a thing. Like, this is the thing that's really bothering me now. It's the suspense thing. But it is possible. Like, if you do introduce this reactive state management scope to a component, you can still, like, you can do a timing based approach where, okay, if well, that's the problem. You can't really do a timing based approach because you don't know. So for example, so what would happen there? It's like you have a child that's thrown to suspense, which means that this reactive scope has been called, right? But you don't know how long that that suspending will how long the suspending will last, right? It could be half a second, it could be 5 seconds. You don't know that. So if you were to do a timing based approach where, okay, let's wait like 5 seconds, and if the component has mounted, let's clean it up, right? But I'm gonna move over here so I kind of look more into the camera. You can't do that because it might still be initializing kind of, or be in a valid render phase. So I wish there was a way to really identify that, because it would also solve if there are any other situations where the tree is disposed of. I don't know if suspense is the only time it happens, because generally concurrent mode allows React to just like render and dispose as much as it wants, and that's why they have these incredibly strict side effect rules. But maybe I want to do a little bit research on that, because I think it's like overwhelmingly better to do this than to do this. Like, it just is. Like, it's, you can't even argue. Like, the reconciler is an overhead. It's like an abstraction over the language. Like, it adds complexity to the execution of the code. It doesn't just execute the code like any other code that you write. It's very special, the code that's being run inside the component. But if you don't have any state management in the component, it's not so special, right? It's more like whenever the UI needs to update, I'll call this function and I'm going to compare the result with the previous result of that function. That is not special. That's something that makes sense, something you can wrap your head around. But this stuff, it's very difficult to wrap your head around that. Okay. Let's see if there's, I'm just thinking about how we're going to approach this. Because I cannot imagine like React concurrent detect this render phase disposal. Oh, here we go. For Mobex, we're trying to prepare for concurrent. In short, when is this? 2019. Oh yeah, I've actually seen this. What was the conclusion? We've read this before. What was the conclusion here? Yeah, so like everybody has had so much problems with this. We start a subscription on Mount, synchronously schedule the teardown using scheduler. What was what like? Oh my god! Yeah, it looks. I created use dispose. Oh, interesting. I'm gonna look at this. Still here. Yes. The tiny React type to help us clean side effects of uncommitted components. It is know that side effect in React should be on the inside use and React will run them only when the component is actually being committed. React may, for various reasons, suspend strict mode aborted renders. Yeah, I wonder what this means, aborted renders. Decide to throw away instance after run, but before running it, as long as we keep side effects and use effects, it's not a problem. Let's take them on render phase. And in case this, yeah. I wonder what... I wonder what the state... Actual implementation. Okay. I want to read this. This is educational. So install the package received from render before. But React suddenly yeah, because that's also a thing. It might re-render it. Okay. So what does MobX do? Yeah, force update. Like all of this has made me think about that the React team thinks of React as, like I've said this before, it's like a state sync library. It's not really for state management. Because if you think about like Facebook, it's all data. Any state management there, like I haven't been on Facebook for ages, but it's like it's about data, and that's why they want to do not only like, so what we do with global state stores is that it becomes like a backend, a state backend in the client, which React syncs with. And now they're putting it on the server so that you can actually sync with kind of the server. So it's like a state syncing view layer, but we need it to manage state. Let's see. Okay, let's read the code. So they create a reaction ref. So reaction in MobX is kind of like a way to track observables. So the JSX factory functionary is like you return use observer, I think, and then you pass a function that's the actual UI. And then we have a mounting ref. And here it uses if it's mounted, it does a force update. Change before. Interesting. And then use dispose uncommitted. Reaction ref. Yeah, so here it just... Oh, interesting. So this hook... yeah, but that's fine. Like I'm thinking about this in the context of like the whole reactive scope. So it would mean that it will dispose of it and then it will create it again. That's fine. Use layout effect. If it's changed before. So what they mean about change before is that like the reaction runs while the component is in the render phase, right? So it needs to know. You shouldn't run force update during the render phase. They have to wait for the commit phase to actually do that. But it's like a stale render that they might commit, right? That's why they do this on use layout effect, to track that if it's not mounted, we're going to flag it as having a change, so that when it's actually mounted using use layout effect, we force update it. So use layout is like before something. It's like we know it's being mounted, but it's not being displayed on the page yet, I think. What is it's a version of that fires before the browser repaints the screen. Yeah. So normally this doesn't happen, right? So, but that's what's happening, and then it says it's mounted, and then it does the disposal, blah blah blah. Yeah. So this, and they call it naive MobX use observer implementation. In JS engines which support finalization registry, we allocate a React state without creating any external reference. And we're for cleanup using finalization registry. Yeah, but that can take a long time, right? And this is the thing. Oh, interesting. User timer based. For platform without, we take a speculative approach. Yeah, I think MobX naive approach is better because you actually want the disposal to run when the component actually like unmounts. Oh, interesting. Testing. Especially as an incremental upgrade approach can be about as new research is going into new power. There's one interesting case to think about. The main motivation for to be added to the language now is because it allows building interop with WASM linear memory. It's how you build interop with a tracing garbage collection language and a ref candor manual collection. There are many patterns that might be a bad idea running, like opening. Yeah, WebSocket, right? You have to wait for the garbage collected. The core principle of using finalization registry to interrupt with an external memory management library isn't, though. Yeah. Yeah, so I disagree with this because this disposal has to do with state management, right? It's not about memory. It's not about freeing memory. It's about actual functionality. So it would be very confusing that like your WebSocket connection doesn't go down when the component unmounts, right? That would just be horrible, very confusing. So I wouldn't call this naive. I would call this the way you want it to work, really. Okay, so we're gonna try something. We're going to try to do this, but we have a different implementation. We're not using hooks. We're actually using a class component. So maybe it's time to look into the actual changes. Okay, so we're going to use this stuff I talked about here. And maybe I can even talk about how Impact originally tried to make context reactive. And then we're going to use this example here to really explain like what does it mean to go reactive. It's not about, yeah, you get performance out of the box, but that's not the important part. It's how you write your code. That's the important part. But we don't have to write that now. We can rather play around with some coding because that's just more fun. But let me explain how things changed. So the whole Vue thing, the reason it stopped is because the more I tried Vue, the more I realized that they don't really care about JSX. Like just the fact that their typing is so off, you can't even put an event handler in there without a type error. And that's such a no-go. And that they haven't fixed that just says so much about their priorities. And I'm not saying they have the wrong priorities, but their priority is templating. And just importing a library, you don't get props typing using JSX. You don't have children typing. And even though we were trying to fix these things, like it just wouldn't work. And I wouldn't want to move React developers into a community that doesn't prioritize their way of programming, which is JSX and TypeScript, right? It would just be wrong. But we learn a shit ton. Docs dev. And what we learn is how you combine state management, reactive state management with a reconciling UI, which Vue does. So I've changed the website a little bit. I'm calling it Reactive React. It's kind of funny how it's called React and it's not really reactive. But this is Reactive React. And then I want to put that article in here. I'm not going to say giving up on React, but something like, what if React was reactive? And then it's about progressive state management. So define stateless components, enhance them with reactive state management, and easily share that state with nested components. So it's about like, you think about your function components as stateless components, as you did when they were first released, right? The function components, they were stateless. They even called them stateless. And that is a good thing, because that's, in terms of the reconciler, that's where the reconciler makes sense. It's with stateless components. And then if you want something stateful, you're going to use this thing, which is I think this is just, reactive components. So instead of leaning towards hooks for state management in React, but there are still hooks that's related to like optimizing the rendering. You have these like lazy hooks to deal with like inputs and stuff like that. But for state management, you would rather go in and use this thing. So this is like create component was an API in React a while back. But it was like this mixins thing, like you pass it an object and you had like lifecycle hooks there. If I remember correctly, you had like a render method. You would have these mixins and stuff like that. But now create component has a new signature, which is the same signature as define component from Vue, where you have your state management scope, and then you have your reconciling user interface scope down here. So when you know like user interfaces are a function of state, that's still true here. It's just that the state isn't passed explicitly into the function. It's accessible from the outer scope. That's the only difference. So what happens here is that when the component initializes, it runs this function. But whenever it updates, Like whenever any of the state accessed in the user interface changes, this function is run again, reconciling. And to me, this makes a lot of sense. And it allows you to write completely normal code up here, and then you just describe your UI down here. It's a beautiful thing. And what I don't think makes why I wanted to go through the rant is because going reactive, I'm not able to explain it well enough here. This is why you want to go reactive. It's this whole thing here. So I'm going to move that into that documentation. And then, yeah, and then you have your reactive state management here. And you, let's see. Yeah. And then you have reactive props. And that's basically, if you pass any props to the component, you can just use them in a reactive way. Good morning, Adam. So in this case, we are multiplying, and we're multiplying the props count if we have the multiply flag. And this just works. Like the props are reactive. And then lifecycle, there's lifecycle hooks. And then scaling up is the interesting part. So if you define some state management, you can do that inline like this. But if it gets complex, or you want to like protect how the UI interacts with the state, you can just move it out into a function, just like a hook, right? And then you return it like that. Or if you want to expose it to nested components, you can create a provider for that state where you just export the use counter, and then instead of using like a provider component, you can just say provide counter in this state management scope, because that's what you're providing, right? You're not providing anything from the user interface scope, you're providing from your state management scope. And the reason we have to do this is that this use counter can be used in reactive components in this state management scope, and it can be used in stateless components in the in stateless components basically. Yes, I asked ChatGPT about this. And the thing is that hooks are is the primitives of React. And this is kind of saying, I don't know. It's going to be, I think people are either going to love it or hate it. That's the thing. Like generally, like reading like anything about state management and hooks, people just don't, they're not built for state management basically. But one thing is building a global state management. Yeah, exactly. This makes more sense than hooks. But if you were to kind of try to alleviate the problems with hooks, doing a global state management thing is way less intrusive than saying that, oh, you should define your components in a different way. Like React was wrong about doing hooks for state management. We're going to create a better component. It's like, it's more the message. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily wrong. It's just that, like, I'm wondering about the reaction. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. But let's write some code, because Cause. Let's see. Excuse me. Let's write some code because I want to fix this suspense thing. It would be nice to actually support disposal during the render phase, not having to say, and also make sure that it actually works beyond suspense, because there are other scenarios this might happen. So we're gonna take MobX's naive implementation. I wanna just check if they've changed their implementation. MobX React Lite. Has been archived. Oh, did I? Oh, I think they actually moved it into MobX. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking more, not in the context of is this overall a good idea. It's more like how to message it to the community and make that kind of part of the introduction. That we're not trying to say that everyone should do this because it's much better than what React recommends, right? It's more like you say, Adam. It's like, do you have challenges doing state management with hooks? And you don't want to work with like two state management paradigms, like one global and one local, partially context. Then maybe this is for you, kind of thing. Let's see, MobX. Yeah, they moved it into the repo. So they have use observer. Let's take a look. Oh, look at this. They changed it a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I really like how I was reflecting yesterday on like how okay, with like every time these new learnings come in and perspectives change, I always like go back to okay, what if we just use React? Is there a way to write React code that that just makes this possible? But fundamentally, it won't work because of the rant. It's just the way you express everything is so completely confusing compared to if you actually had a reactive scope. It's just insane. Which is why I want to highlight that as the main reason. Like performance, yes, we talk a lot about reactivity and performance, but it's the way you write the code. It's gonna make you sane. Okay, so let's see. Do not store even as part of a closure on this object, otherwise it will prevent garbage collection. Therefore, reaction disposal via finalization registry. Oh, so what are they doing here? So they're still creating this reaction, but they're changing it. Are they using finalization registry? Oh, observer finalization. So they changed their approach. Do not access admin repair. Yeah, but I don't like this. I don't think this is how you really want to do it, because where is this coming from? Utils. Observer finalization registry. Universal finalization registry. Oh, so they have their own finalization registry. Or is it like just in here? Whoa. This is interesting. Who is this crazy person? Eurogator. Interesting. How are they using... Do they really have their own finalization registry? How does it work? So they register a target. Okay, are they using like a weak map type of thing? No, they don't even use weak map. So they're using a map where they have a token. Why is that optional? And they set a value and when it's registered. And then it schedules a sweep. So how does it... It checks registration. Max age. This dot finalize. Okay, finalize is probably like some kind of callback or something. This dot finalize. Where is finalize? Huh. Okay, so they changed their approach. But I don't like that. I don't think it's the right way. It works. So the thing is, this works for observation. It's just that it will clean up these reactions later, right? It won't clean it up immediately. It will clean it up later. And that's fine. But for state management, like for an actual like cleanup of state management, you need that to happen like when the component is actually unmounting or being disposed of, or you'll be very confused. Like just an interval, for example. I wonder if there's any more... If there's any more on this. Concurrent. Mostly complete guide. On hold. When was this from? 2019. Wow, there's been a lot of discussions. Release. Okay, with Royce. Should have flagged up 2 and renders this into same. Wow, he really knows his React. But what is the release with great work? Okay, I guess... Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, how are we gonna approach this? Why do they call this naive? Does it not work? Is that why they call it naive? Organization registry. What's that? Can I use? Okay, so the thing is, maybe we should, just for fun, let's try to come up with our own solution. So the thing is, there's a feature in JavaScript called weak maps and weak sets. But they are also based on, I'm not sure how fast they are. Are they immediate? Weak map. Does it so if something is not referential, it can't be, if something cannot be referenced anymore, does it immediately go? The problem with weak map is that it will just put something, it will just, it doesn't really give you notice if something is not referenced anymore. It will just make this other thing not referenced anymore either. And that's not good enough. We need to actually execute something when something goes out of scope. Which kind of sucks. I wish there was a weak map event. Or a weak set event. So if you kind of put the component, well, I guess that kind of is the problem though, is that if you have a side effect in a component, it's still referential. What's that word? You can still reference it. It still has a reference from within itself, kind of. Or maybe you're yeah. Why can't React just give us a hook for it? They know when they're disposing of it. Why can't they just tell us? Because when does this actually know that it's been disposed? The problem is we don't know when the components are disposed. The only way to know if a component is disposed is using, layout effect is the earliest, but layout effect isn't run, and component will unmount isn't run when a component is disposed during its render phase, which happens in concurrent mode. The typical scenario is suspense, but there are other situations as well. So having a proper implementation that actually knows when the component was disposed during the render phase, allowing us to clean up state management, that would be ideal. Currently we have a suspense boundary that throws a warning that if it hits that suspense boundary, that you should add your own suspense boundary. Basically Reactive Components doesn't support suspense, but they could if we knew when the component is disposed of during the render phase. What's it use? Oh, do they use dispose and committed? Oh, okay, sorry. This is an example. I thought they were kind of like um it's just a simple explanation of how it can be used. So this is an example of using this hook, which is based on finalization registry. There has to be a way. There has to be a way to detect this. Hmm. Detect disposal. Oh, look at this. Yeah, this is my issue. I was trying to, but I never got anything. So I had this example. Never got any follow up on this, sadly. Yeah, that sucks. I'm not sure how to approach it. The point is that, like, the example with suspense is like, okay, it runs through, it initializes all the components, and then it throws a suspense boundary. Everything's like running. But that's also a thing. Like, yeah, I think this is also a problem because what we're doing now is that we're, well, no, that's not a problem. That is not a problem. Like, because we start observation. Like, so say you have some. So the thing is, like, you have this componentry stuck in the render phase. There is no UI yet, but the state management is running. So you might trigger state updates as part of that, right? But you shouldn't actually render the component because it hasn't been mounted yet, which is fine. We already detect that. Like, we know if we've been mounted, and only then we actually only then we god damn it, we actually render. But we're not doing the thing that Mobex did. We're not doing the, let's see, mounted. So let's see. So here it is. Yeah, we're not actually, oh, we're not actually checking it. So the problem here is if it's tricky. So what we would have to do here is, if it's not mounted, we should just return. Wait a minute. Oh, sorry. If result So if we have a result and not this is mounted, we should return. So that this happens if, when I say render phase, it means it's not been mounted yet. So we're stuck in the render phase because of suspense or whatever. We've changed the state and it triggers observation of something in the UI, which means that we need to recalculate the UI, right? And then we see that we're not mounted yet. So what we want to do is basically what MobX was doing here, which was the change before. Like there has to be a flag that, oh, during its rendering phase, it was an observation happened. So it needs to actually, when it mounts, it needs to go and render again. Well, we don't necessarily need to go and render again. Well, yeah, we do. Because it won't actually go and run the render function. It's run the render function. It won't run it again until it actually mounts. That's also a really sucky thing. It's like, okay, it did that, but it needs to mount before we can like update it again. It's very difficult. Like I've gotten stuck in this so many times. But as I said, like typically that doesn't happen, right? So that like not ideal, because there's nothing like component, because we had component will mount, right? Use component did mount. Yeah, so the thing is like with a class component, we don't have access to something like use layout effect to kind of update run render again. The present of get snapshot before update. What's get snapshot before? Oh, interesting. Runs before React applies the result of component render to the document and returns an object to be given to. To be given to component did update. Yeah. So you can't really get the right state. Static lifecycle. I would imagine like component, what's it called? Component will update. Or probably not. Yeah, it's deprecated. Yeah, that's something else. Yeah, so it's like it's not ideal, but it's an edge case, right? But even just that, like, even if you're like, so let's imagine you're using like an observable promise. So if you're using an observable promise and you use it with a usehook, well, you can't use it with a usehook because you don't have hooks in reactive components. I really think that, like, my only worry is if there's some other scenario that we don't know about that's not related to suspense that causes React to like just dispose of the thing during the render phase. It's like we don't have a guarantee for its life cycle. When can React dispose component trees in the render phase? We can ask ChatGPT about that. What specific scenarios can cause React to dispose of a component during the render phase, never mounting the component? Conditional rendering in oh, interesting. If condition changes to false during the render process, interesting, and never mounted. Okay, so if you actually did this, right, this would be a reactive component. God damn, I love ChatGPT. It would never be but it's like it's edge cases. Yeah, error during rendering, that's another case. But here we are able, in the class component, we can catch the error. So we can clean up specifically for this scenario. Of the component being rendered is during the render phase. Oh, this is interesting. Because you might have a parent that uses the usehook, which throws a suspense, and then you navigate away. No, but then it doesn't. No, but then it stops there, right? It never actually mounts it even. Yeah, strict mode. During render? I don't understand how. I guess like we're kind of seeing changes as something that we're seeing changes as something being applied every time. I don't understand the scenarios where you would actually. It might be a ChatGPT is confusing a bit as well, of course. But the point is that this can happen. It can happen. And I don't want to create something that like only deals with explicitly with error explicitly with suspense, and then there are like this crazy scenario and something weird happens and you can't ever figure it out. Yeah, we could use functional instead of class. Does it ever, like with use ref, like if I do instance use ref and it's like some class, and I say if no instance current equals new sum class, oops, sorry, console.log creating instance. This is kind of annoying. Why is this faded? Does it mean that it actually runs twice? Or I wonder. Let's count. It's really annoying. Oh, sorry. Oops. Hey, didn't I? Oh, sorry. Counter. Yeah, it runs twice. So like, there's no way. That's the problem with function components. You can't instantiate something. It's considered a side effect, and it's not true. Like, a class instance isn't a side effect, but you can't. Well, I guess that's the thing. It's like it should be possible to reliably. That's really the point. So you should be able to instantiate this class. But imagine this is the setup function, right? It will run it twice, so it has side effects. So you will kind of. Well, I guess you can argue as long as it runs the disposer. But it doesn't do that. It's like, this is what strict mode does. It runs the component scope once, and then it just completely throws it away. There's nothing. There's no way to run like dispose on it. It just runs it, throws it away. Yeah, it can do that, but then you have like 2 components for every component, which is like, and you would still have issues. I think. It's funny how but doesn't React run? I'm gonna try something. Let's just do this and then export default. How does a class extends component constructor? create. Oh. Creating class render. Hello there. Oh, sorry. Super props. And this is also one thing that annoys me is that context is deprecated here. Passing the context, but context doesn't work without passing it. It's interesting. Yeah, so it actually creates the class twice as well. Like Chrome developer tools, faded console log. Why do they have faded console? It's very annoying. Oh, what the fuck? Is it that thing that does it? Okay. So it creates the class twice. Render. It renders it. Well, it creates and render. That's the thing. I wonder. Let's see. Count plus plus. Oh. Does it just? I think it only creates it twice. Yeah, you see this? It creates the class twice. And then it renders the last created class twice. So this class is completely thrown away. It's just a constructor. So if we run the reactive scope in the constructor, we can't dispose of it. Like there's nothing. It's exceptionally weird. Like it's not, well, it's not weird. I just hate that they don't allow us to deal with this. But what you could say is that, like, the chance of this happening is very, very small. And you can use the finalization registry. Yeah, we could run the setup in the render. This is what I did with the injection containers. I created them in the... I had some logic related to this. How did I do that? Maybe we can... let's play with this. Let's imagine that we function reactive scope. So console.log. Yeah, and let's do this. So we have a reactive scope, and we're going to just have a disposer for it. So create a reactive scope, and then console.log disposed reactive scope. So we're going to say creating class reactive scope. It's not defined. So we're going to say if node this reactive scope equals sorry, and then we would have like component will unmount. We would say this reactive scope, and we would call it so it creates the reactive scope only once, which is good. But we don't know when React will choose to dispose of it. I wish there was like some kind of like the only thing we know is if the component cannot be referenced anymore. But the thing is, the only thing that can make us act on it is finalization registry. But maybe that's fine. Like, in the situations, and there's also a thing about, like, we know if there's something to clean up in the reactive scope, because you register an on-will unmount listener, right? So it's also possible to only activate this when we know it has a side effect. What's also interesting is like refs. So you can have a reference to a DOM element. But again, like, you don't know. Yeah, no. You want to know when React doesn't have any reference to the class anymore. So we can also look at that, like registry equals new finalization registry. Isn't this the thing? Oops. Finalization registry. How did this work? Oh. Oh, was it just because? What's happening here? Oh yeah, whatever. How did it work? Held value. Yeah. Held value. Let's call it that. Wow, it's super laggy. No reference. Held value. And then we say register this component plus this.id. I have to refresh here. It's super laggy. I'm not sure why. So now if we trigger the memory, we're supposed to be able to trigger this. Collect garbage. Yeah, you see this? No reference component. So dispose of that. So we could like register. Can that be like or an object, even yeah. Cleanup callback. Yeah, I just don't like it. But why doesn't the React team see the need for this? Like, it's such a low level thing and they want people to build abstractions on top of it. So why not give more access to the runtime of the reconciler so we can build behavior? Right. Um I've been here before. Um, and I haven't figured it out. I have not figured it out. Maybe it really is impossible to do it. Like, one thing is, so for example, with signals, it has an observer, right? So it instantiates an observer. But that observer, like the first time that observer is created, oh, I wonder if it actually has an issue. I did track it though, but did I track it in strict mode? I need to check that. But yeah, this is just yeah, I'm not sure where to go from here. I have to reflect on this. Like, but I'm anxious about it because I've tried this so many times and I just don't think the React team wants people to do this. Like, we are literally introducing state. Like, not state but side effects. And React does not support side effects. But it's very annoying because yeah, but it's why can't we just have some notice when the component is disposed of? Like, but maybe it's to make React faster. Like, they rely on the garbage collector, so they will just go in and just render something, right? So imagine like they're just initializing a component tree and then something happens and they just initialize a new one. Like, there's no, like, they don't go down and dispose of it, they just replace it. And I guess that's what Dan tried to point out as well in the thingy. He says, think of it as computation, like it just replaces what's there. And that does make sense at the low level, but it doesn't make sense at a practical level. So what you can do though, it's like, don't instantiate anything. So for example here, you can't instantiate the interval during this thing. You have to do it like on mounted. That's where you instantiate the interval. it's still simpler. But again, it's weird. Like, you want access to some class, right? And you want to render it. For fuck's sake. So for us, it's like we have this connection to like Code Sandbox has an actual class that represents a connection to the dev box. And if we would want to start that connection in a component, and you would like during whatever, you would kind of change it to a new connection. And then that other connection wouldn't drop until yeah, so as an example here, let's do like some dev box connection. So this is gonna create a dev box connection, set everything up. You get the state of the current connection and everything. And then when you unmount, you want to dispose of that connection. So what can happen here is that it will be late. Like if we use finalization registry, we can make sure that it actually does dispose of it, but it won't do it immediately. So what would happen in the user interface is that you would see an avatar basically on that other dev box, even though you weren't there. And then it would suddenly disappear due to memory garbage collection. But like normally it would work, right? Normally it would be just fine. Even with suspense, like the chance of a user navigating away from a loading state, a suspending loading state, is like it's exceptionally minimal. Yeah. You can, I think you can think about it like that. But I never thought about like how React kind of has this slot for like a component tree, and it just creates it, right? And then there's a lot of other stuff happening under the hood, and then it might go through that tree and start initializing all the components. But if something else happens, it should be able to, if it hasn't gotten to the commit phase, like, so that is the render phase. It's just, okay, create a component tree. Just think of it as classes, like construct them. Do not render them even, just construct them. Well, it will render them, but construct and run the render method. That's what it does, right? And then having the ability to just do that again, like you have like at some slot in the data structure represents that component tree, and just being able to replace it safely, that makes a lot of sense. And it can do that multiple times during the render phase, if needed, or it can just remove the slot if needed. Like, it's not... That makes a lot of sense. But yeah, okay. So finalization registry. So it doesn't work for IE 11, but that's fine. It can just have a memory leak in 11. We don't care about it. Like, and this is the thing. This is for productivity apps, so you typically use But what would this mean? It would mean that on will unmount can be late. Like we can't guarantee when it runs, so it can take like seconds. It can even take minutes before it runs. It might not run at all during the session of the user. But the thing is, the thing is that even though, so let's imagine that it doesn't like the thing, we don't know what that side effect is. That's the problem. Like we had an example with a WebSocket connection, but that might lead to, like, it can lead to all sorts of things. Maybe the user can only have one WebSocket connection with the backend, and suddenly they can't create a new connection because they have an active connection. Yeah, who cares about the IE? But it could be some other globally thing that does something, and you can only have one like instance at a time. But if it's just something that changes the state, it doesn't really matter. Like it will keep changing the state in the background, but because it's observing it and it's never been mounted, like nothing will happen. Like it will trigger the observer, but it hasn't been mounted yet, so nothing will happen. So that's safe. Like the change of state is perfectly fine. It's all the other side effects. No, it actually doesn't. The use effect doesn't even run until React commits the UI to the DOM, or commits the component to the DOM. That's when the use effect runs. And then its disposer runs, as you say, when it unmounts. But it might never get there. It might never get to where it calls use effect. And this is the mind-blowing thing about concurrent mode, is that React has been creating strict mode and all this stuff, but they haven't explained why. They haven't explained that there's like two parts of a component. You have its render, like the returned result, and it has this other layer of like effects and stuff. And React might only call the component and never call the effects because of concurrent mode, and then just throw stuff away. So you just never know when that happens. Which is why nothing should have a side effect. Calling the component function should not have a side effect. Calling useState with a callback should not have a side effect. Like nothing should have a side effect. Or when I say side effect, it should not create something that needs to be disposed of. The only thing that can create something that needs to be disposed of is use effect, because use effect guarantees that it only runs when it's actually mounted, and when it updates or it gets unmounted, it will call the disposer. That's a guarantee from React. But that's outside the rendering, right? And we need to instantiate things for the rendering. But then React doesn't guarantee that there's any way to know when. Oh, it's so annoying. But maybe there's like maybe there's something else. Yeah, so for example, with suspense. So if you have a suspense boundary and then you render something, and then one of the components uses the use hook and throws the promise to the suspense boundary, then all the components that led down to the use hook, they just ran through their render. None of the no effect has been run in that component tree, but it has prepared. Yeah, but the problem is doing it. Oh yeah, you mean like doing the side effect? Yeah. So there's really two ways to go about it. Is that it's under the same rules. So do not instantiate classes, intervals, or anything that's a side effect in the setup scope or the reactive scope. Use onMounted for that. But the problem is you might instantiate a side effect that's required during rendering. And this is the mind-bending thing. Is like, but I have a side effect, but there's state in that side effect that the UI needs. So you have to instantiate it during rendering. But then you can't safely dispose of it. Yeah, we had a lot of issues with our WebSocket connection because of this. We did some weird trickery in instantiation. We moved the instantiation outside of React, so you would still instantiate it inside React, but you would kind of, the class was generated from the outside, and it kind of kept a map of instantiated instances. So if it was called multiple times, it would just return the same thing. But then you have disposal. So we just removed strict mode to deal with it, and I think we were using suspense for something, and we removed that as well. Anyways, what very often happen is that we would have like connections that didn't close when we did the logic with React. Can't remember the full story, but yeah, one thing is making like just like the reactive scope itself. Like instantiation is something you can fix, because you can make sure that you only have one instance by using the render to, oh sorry, what's that? Sorry, here we did it. Like we use the render to say that, okay, if we don't have a scope, we're gonna create the scope. So that's doable. But when it has this scope and it does not move into any life cycle, like it doesn't start its life cycle, then there's nothing that tells you that it should be disposed of. But we can use finalization registry for those edge cases, because typically it doesn't happen. And it's also the timing. Like, you could also do a timer. Like, But the thing is, it's no guarantee like any timer is a guarantee. Because you wouldn't have a component tree stuck in its render phase for very long, right? That would be such a bad user experience that wouldn't like happen. But the point is that you can't make quick checks. You have to guess if you have to guess if, so you can have like after 500 milliseconds, let's check, has it been mounted? No, it hasn't been mounted. But does it mean it has been disposed? We don't know. We don't have a guarantee. But what I wonder is if you use, okay, we're gonna try something, because now we have the finalization registry here, right? So we know if we do this, we go into memory. And where's memory? Memory. And I clean it. No reference component 0. So we're going to do something else. We're going to try to, because global detector. It's going to be a new weak map. I can't remember what was what there. Was it the key? What was it? I can't remember. Weak map. Oh. weak camp. Weak map. So a weak map is a collection of key values where its key must be objects or non, with values of an arbitrary, which does not create a strong reference. Yeah, an object's presence as a key does not prevent it from being garbage. Yeah, because weak map so has okay, so I think it can be a weak set. I don't think it matters. So if we have a global detector where we say global detector adds this. Now the challenge is that we have to create something that doesn't keep a strong reference to class or to this component. What I'm trying to do is have a timer. Thinking about that, like, okay, let's have a timer that runs until the component gets mounted, that checks if the reference to this component is gone. But let's rather do, we're gonna try something because we can look at it, I think. Where is it? Global detector, window.global detector. Because I think it's gonna lose its reference. So global global detector. Oh, come on. So it has 2 entries. Why does it have 2 entries? What if I remove? And this is kind of difficult for me to. Oh, so it creates by having it there? Wait, isn't that the whole point? It's a weak map, weak set. Isn't that like... How does this create a strong... Oh, this is interesting. So if I add it to the weak set, the... Oh, can we move memory up here? There we go. So if I do this, and can we even move it down here? Isn't there it possible to have like 2? Yeah, there we go. So let's do, can I move memory down here? Memory. Oh. Move to, oh, nice. Okay. Okay, so now it cleaned it up, right? But if I add it to the weak set, didn't I? Oh, window dot. Yeah, whatever. So global detector is a weak set. And if I add it to the weak set and I try to garbage collect it. Oh, now it was garbage collected. So global, oh, now it has 1, right? So my point is, what would happen if I did a timeout there? Set timeout. But maybe that holds a reference to it. That's the problem. Global detector has this. Oh, maybe we should console log it. Hee hee. Yeah, so now we've created... So this is what I'm wondering. It's like... Okay, we're gonna try something else. So we are gonna create a weak map instead. Weak map. And then we're gonna say, I think it's set this. Yeah, let's just create it. Weak. This is so... Okay, let's symbol, new symbol, or I guess symbol is like this. But I don't think this makes any sense at all. Like, this doesn't make any sense. What I want is for... Okay. I kind of want a new weak set. I kind of want to have a weak... But regardless, I'll have. This is the thing. I'm probably doing something that makes absolutely no sense. Because to be able to check the this, you have to keep a strong reference to it. That's the problem, and then it just stays there. uh, but I thought you could like check. Wait a minute. Weak map. Weak map. So it's a collection of key values. This key must be objects or non-registered symbols. I wish I was a proper programmer of an arbitrary JavaScript type and which does not create strong references to its keys. That is, an object present as a key does not prevent the object from being garbage collected. Once an object used as a key has been collected, its corresponding values in any weak map become candidates for garbage collection as well. I don't understand what you would use it for. Weak map allows associating data to objects in a way that doesn't prevent the key object from being collected, even if the values reference the keys. Why does it have a has method? Like, why, if you can't, doesn't that mean that you need a strong reference to it to even use the has method? Oh, asserting whatever a value has been, has been associated to the key. Returns a boolean asserting whatever value has been associated to the key. I don't think it makes sense what I'm trying to do. Yeah, like even this, like a weak map can be a particularly useful construct when mapping keys to information about the key that is valuable only if the key has not been garbage collected. But if you're referencing that information somewhere, then it will stay. I don't. And if it's information about the key, why don't you just have it on the key? Like if the key is an object and you need information about that object, why don't you just have it on the object and then it will be garbage collected with the object? But because weakmat doesn't allow observing the liveness, its keys are not enumerable. That's fine. Hmm. Yeah, but I don't understand. So in this example, if application code provides a config object and that object may be dynamically created, but you would keep a reference to that object. That's what I don't understand. But it needs Yeah, I don't understand how this is like how it actually works or how it's useful. Uh oh. Oh, so it's more like you use the key you use, it's something that can lose its reference. So yeah, so you don't have a reference to data. Like you don't. Okay, so in the example from Reddit, if you get a config from application code, you would put it straight into the weak map. But what would then be the key? But would the config be the key? But if the config is the key, what is then the value? Like, I don't understand the example. Okay, so it's not to detect if something's. It's basically a way to notify that something can be garbage collected. Or. Yeah, no, I don't understand this. Like I can't put it into practice. So if I'm saying that this component, when it gets garbage collected, take along with you this symbol or whatever. But that's what it is, right? It's. But I guess what I don't understand is if I do object this and I put object here, if this component gets garbage collected, this object of course will get garbage collected because it's not referenced anywhere else. So why? And if you want to get access to this object, you would need a reference to this. And it confuses me. I don't understand it. What would make sense to me is like, okay, let's weak map this thing and let me use this object as a way to have a weak link to this thing. So that if this is garbage collected or it doesn't have a reference, I mean, I'm able to use this as a lookup to figure out if it's still there. That's what I want. And that's how I thought it would work. It's like it's a weak lookup. So if it didn't have any more references, I wouldn't be able to look it up. It would be like null. Yeah, I don't understand. So but what is weak here? Is this weak to that one? So if I did a timeout, I don't understand this. So would that be the thing? What's this? Oh, yeah, that is the, sorry, that is the component. Yeah, I don't understand this. I want a weak reference to this so I can check if it's been dereferenced. But if I do it like this, and I have to, oh, sorry, get, isn't it has? Yeah, that's why I was confused. And that's true, but this makes sense to me. It's like I have a weak map. I have this object. I want it to have a weak reference to this, so that it doesn't make this so it can still dereference this. But then I want to check: has this been dereferenced? That's what I want to check. But what if I do this? Like it's outside of it? I don't understand it. But now I have a strong reference to object. So that doesn't make any sense. But if I do this, now I have a strong reference to this because I'm basically using this inside the timeout. So it doesn't really help me. It's probably not the thing that's going to help me. But why isn't there a feature like this? Just detect the referenced object. Yeah, that's... What's this? This is something else. JavaScript, detect... Oh, let's ask ChatGPT. Is there a way in JavaScript where I can detect when an object has no reference anymore? Yeah. Can't be done. To hold a weak reference to an object, meaning it does not prevent the object from being garbage collected. Yeah. Yeah. Hold references to objects without preventing garbage collection. But it's garbage collected. It's not actually dereferenced, right? There's a difference. So finalization registry would still be the thing. Yeah, avoid using finalization registry for application logic that depends on precise timing. Yes. Yeah. I guess this is the question though. Avoid using finalization registry for application logic that depends on precise timing, as garbage collection is non-deterministic. Do we need cleanup to have precise timing? Like, does that need to be an absolute guarantee? Because so cleanup and on-will unmount are different things. Really, they are different things. On-will unmount will only happen if you're mounted. Well, cleaning up is something that can happen. It's memory cleanup. Lig. I think I need food. But this is also something that needs to be fixed in signals, I think. I think I have a memory leak there. Funny enough, the memory leak is more because of strict mode than anything else. I do wonder if you sync external store. Oh yeah, no, I don't have a memory leak there because yeah, that's the interesting thing. It's like in signals, it will create this observer context for every component that observes. And then during the rendering, it will register signals to that context. So it will track like all the signals that's being accessed, but only when using external store triggers, it will actually subscribe and add that context to the signal so that it triggers observation. And that's guaranteed to unsubscribe as well. So that's a really interesting, I think it's a really good implementation. Because it's fine that an observer context has reference to signals. Because a component will never outlive the signals themselves. It's the other way around. It's like the signals outlive the context. But yeah. Oh, what should we do about this? I just have a hard time concluding on this. We can use finalization registry, but that creates non-deterministic cleanup. And we can't really use something like on will unmount. It's very interesting. It complicates things. It's like, for example, okay, so let's take the WebSocket thing. So you really only want to you could argue that you should set up the WebSocket connection when you're mounted, right? Because that's when you care about it. It's when the UI is actually showing. But at the same time, you wouldn't be able, yeah, and then you could have, so if some class or some DevBox connection, it would be like you would have some class and then you would do on mounted, you would do connect, for example. So it's almost like but yeah, it kind of sucks that the thing I can't get past is that this works 99.999999999 infinitely 9 percent of cases. It's just if React happens to, for some reason, dispose of the So another way to think about this is, what if we never care about you know what you could also do? This is kind of crazy. So what you could do is um how would you do this? You would kind of return null. You wouldn't instantiate anything, and you would just return null from the component. And then when it did mount or use layout effect, then you would flag it as ready to render. And then you create the instance. So you would only run That's an interesting thing. What if yeah. So what if this render, there's nothing like component will mount. That would be would have been interesting. The problem is like here we have to do it on component did mount, which means that like you will have this duplicate render thing. But the first time it just returns null, right? So it's, I guess it wouldn't be very efficient rendering. So like if you have a bigger component tree and you just want to like render through it, and then commit it, like here it would be, it would meet the first one, it would return null, it would then mount it, it would re-render to kind of trigger everything. And then it would start like, oh, maybe the first child is like another stateful component, and that would just return null, and then it mounts it, then it reruns the component. It would be pretty janky, I think, but it would work. It would give reliable but yeah, I just hate the fact that we have to, you can't do this. You can't safely just create an interval and clear it on a mount. There's this other layer. Like the user has to understand that. I would love to remove that thing, that that layer of understanding. That because React has concurrent mode with the with a render phase where it might just dispose of the tree, you can't write this code. This is the most natural thing in the world. And you can't do it because, again, you can do it in 99.999999999% of the cases. And then you have to understand why. And I hate that. I don't want to put that mental load on developers. It doesn't make any sense. But maybe, so another thing is, okay, so there's this other thing that I've learned is, I've been watching some, well, different. I think I first got inspired by when Lex Friedman had Pieter Levels. It's like this digital nomad startup hacker guy. And I watched like Jonathan Blow, the game designer, who has a lot of opinions about programming. But the point is, watching those two is like, you want to make coding enjoyable, and don't apply constraints. Don't apply constraints to be correct. Like, be more, what's it called? When you heuristic about it, like if let's say code is 100% enjoyable, and then you add a constraint like strict mode, and your enjoyment of coding drops to 50%, because it's just the runtime doesn't, like, the code doesn't run the way you think it runs, and you get a lot of issues with that. And then you compare that drop of 50% with the bugs that can occur because you don't have that constraint. And there's a difference there. And that's something I'm really reflecting on now. It's like, it's almost like there will always be bugs. The question is, how good is the system at notifying you when those bugs occur, and how good is it at helping you fix those bugs? You don't just add constraints to remove potential bugs. You put your effort into, in those cases the bugs actually appear, make it obvious what happened, and let the developer fix it. And then keep the enjoyment and like productivity of writing code as high as possible. So with that in mind, what if we rather use finalization registry not as a mechanism to clean up, but as a mechanism to give a warning that it didn't clean up, right? We can check if the component has any on-will unmount, because that's the only way it can potentially have a problem. And if it has on-will unmount and it wasn't run, we throw a warning in the console to the developer and just say that, hey, this component, it was thrown away by React and it has an on-will unmount because of concurrent rendering. Maybe it was because of like, ensure that you're using a suspense boundary if you're using suspense. Or whatever, or make sure that or see if you can like not or just like check your code and make sure it doesn't cause a side effect, that this isn't an actual problem. I think we should do that. And then the argument is that this code, some class connect, this code is way more enjoyable and intuitive to write than having to have maybe like a special cleanup hook, write documentation about side effects and all of this shit. Yeah, that's what I want to say. And then if you're running on IE11, like, nobody develops on IE11, right? So it doesn't matter. This is a development tool to help people just write better. So it's not like React will act differently. Like suddenly in production, the component suddenly is disposed of during its render phase. I guess there's like, maybe there's like some kind of edge case or something, but then yeah, I think that's the strategy we're gonna take. Just because I'm fucking pissed. I'm so sick and tired of all these constraints being applied to us as programmers, to the extent that we can't just intuitively build fucking applications and ship them to users. Yeah. Okay, I need food. But we're gonna try to, I have a meeting, it's ramping up at work again. so I don't have that much time. Well, I'm not sure how my days are gonna be moving forward now, but we'll figure out how much time I have for streaming. But I'm gonna eat some lunch, and then I have a chat with a colleague, and then I'm gonna do another stream, and we're gonna implement finalization registry as a development tool to notify when this scenario actually happens, so that you can fix it. You can fix it as a developer. And I'm gonna fucking write that in the documentation. This perspective of how we're applying all these fucking constraints, making our development experience horrible. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for all the input, Adam. It really helps. It would be really rough going through this without the feedback. But yeah, I think this was like super educational for everyone. Like the stuff we have to consider doing this stuff, like how does React actually work under the hood? Its principles, its perspectives. How do we actually want to write our code, and so on and so on. So yeah, thanks again. I'll drop in for a stream in about an hour, 1.5 hours maybe. Okay, bye for now.